committee of the whole meeting to order. Can I have the roll call, please?
Mr. Canning?
Here.
Mrs. Gleason? Here. Mr. Johnson?
Here.
Mrs. Jones? Mrs. Camworth here. Mrs. Ressler? Here. Ms. Stearns?
Here. Please rise for the pledge. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Do we have any comments from the public? So O'Malley, you can start with the presentation.
I'm up first.
Okay.
Good evening, everyone. We're going to try to accomplish two things tonight. First, we're going to go through a global picture of our financial situation and try to put that into some perspective and make some understanding on that. And then we're going to go over the list of questions that were presented in April, and we'll try to answer those as best we can. So that's our goal for this evening. I think if we use the same format, if we keep the questions to the end, we'll be happy to answer all of those. The other thing I want to really stress, when I started, the direction of the board was very clear. Improve academics and manage a budget deficit. There was an understanding at the time that for many, many years we operated under a deficit. So the goal was to make sure that that deficit didn't grow while enhancing, supporting, and maintaining the academic programs. And I want you to keep that in mind, because everything that we presented last week was focused on that goal of improving academic achievement as best we can. Is it perfect? Is it where we want it? Absolutely not, but it's our best efforts to do that. Tonight you're going to see our best efforts to achieve a direction that the board gave us. And that direction was maintain a manageable deficit and run programs and give students opportunities. Okay? Now, that is the direction that we're operating under. And I don't want you to confuse the words reduce the deficit with manage the deficit. We were charged with managing the deficit and providing opportunities. If the board changes direction and comes out and says, administrators, we want you to reduce the deficit, our mindset, the goals that we establish, what we set out to do, changes drastically. Okay? Or if the board says, you know, we need to do some things to enhance our programs, that's a different direction than the direction that we're operating under. Okay? And I want you to remember that. And whatever direction the board sets, we'll be happy and aggressively attack those. And what you're going to see tonight is us aggressively attacking the direction that the board gave us, which was achieve academically, manage a deficit, and don't take opportunities away from our students. So you're going to see a number of those examples. Okay? With that, we'll turn it over to Tom. Again, I'll try to jump in when possible. I apologize to Tom for stepping on his toes if I get in his way. So, Mr. O'Malley, you're up.
Good evening, board members, community, administrators. Thank you for the opportunity to present some of our financial information to the committee of the whole this evening. Taking a look at an overview, we're going to be looking at some of the direction that Dr. Kendall just mentioned, some of the financial history, along with some of the challenges and the threats that we face in the unknown future, some opportunities that we foresee in the future as well. We'll also look at our debt structure, what has been taken place historically and some options to consider for the future. We'll take a look at our fund balances. We'll also look at our financial profile that is designated from the Illinois State Board of Education, and then we'll look at some of the savings that have been generated in the district over the course of the last several years. So, kind of touching on some of the previously provided direction. We all agree that it's important that we maintain and continue to provide our students with all the opportunities that currently exist. And that's very rare in light of all the financial challenges that we're faced with, particularly when we compare ourselves to surrounding neighboring districts that are heavily reliant on general state aid and state funding as we are here in District 228. And we feel very good about the fact that not only have we continue to provide programs, we've also expanded a number of programs, and we've done a number of other things that will be highlighted throughout the presentation. We recognize that we're operating a deficit, and the direction has been to maintain a manageable deficit. I've mentioned, and you've heard me say this before, we could eliminate the deficit. That's not the problem, but getting there would do a lot of things to impact our students, our staffs, and our programs throughout the district. And again, we've been challenged to keep that deficit from expanding and increasing. And when we looked at the previous financial projections, at 4 years out, we were looking at having projected deficits of double digits again, back to where we were similar to 2006, which we'll take a look at.
Can I step in there for a second?
Absolutely.
Now, we do a lot of analyzation along the way, and I spend a lot of my time working on, does this make sense academically? This will hurt us financially. Or if we do this financially, will this affect us academically? So when I make a presentation to you, when you see anything that you vote on, you see the superintendent is recommending. What that really means is we've been in meetings, I've refereed Corey fight with Tom over whatever issue it is, whether it be staffing, whether it be decision ed. That went through an incredible process on our end, and when the superintendent recommends, that means I've analyzed this. Will it help us academically? And how will it affect us financially? I feel confident that when we bring something forward, that it's looked at through those two lenses. And my job is to look at a bigger picture, and it can't be that one goal wins and another goal suffers. We want success in both of those goals.
The third point there is that we have a commitment to all of our stakeholders, and we've got to try and maintain a balance that is acceptable by all. And this is difficult because you've got some factions of those stakeholders that could be on this end and others on that end. And so we have to try to find that sweet spot as best as we can. And the last thing is, we know that we've got many financial uncertainties ahead of us, and we've got to make sure that we continue to position ourselves to be able to address those financial uncertainties. And we've done that, and we see that as it's represented by our fund balances as we move forward in the district.
And that's another thing, the word reduce makes me nervous if it's in isolation. We've done a lot of reducing. We had to do that in order to account for the curveballs that the state is throwing at us. So while we're trying to reduce and get as close to a manageable deficit or no deficit, you still get curveballs added by the state. So it feels like we're reducing and we're not gaining any traction. A lot of that's going to be out of our control.
Next, we're going to take a look at some of the financial history, and we need to provide some historical data for everybody to understand some of the financial challenges the district's been faced with. And one of those big challenges that happened in Cook County in 1994 was called PTEL. It's stands for Property Tax Extension Limitation Law, and it was designed to limit the increase in extensions for taxing bodies that they could put upon their taxpayers. And PTEL basically allows the district to have a limited inflationary increase in the tax extensions. And we'll take a look at what that looks like in just a moment. Again, this took place in 1994, and during that time, the district was in very difficult financial situations, and they had been working tirelessly to have the adoption of a referendum. And in 1995, that did in fact take place. The district successfully passed a voted-in referendum by the community. Now, that was quite a number of years ago, and at that time, what that did was it raised our operating rate for the district. It allowed us to levy a little bit additional to what we were limited to within the tax caps. Tax caps is another name for PTEL, commonly referred to that in Cook County. But with that being the case, we stated that it would last us 5 to 6 years. That money and that raise in that operating rate would sustain us based on how the financial situation was at that time. It's been more than 20 years, and we have not gone back to the community and asked for a referendum for a number of reasons. We've gone through some very difficult financial times in the last 6 to 8 years. We've had a recessionary period where the markets significantly decreased. We've had a significant decline in our housing market that really impacted situations. A lot of people were overextended because the way they were giving out mortgages at the time. And when the values changed, people no longer could afford their mortgages, and things became, people been finding themselves underwater very quickly. And that triggered the whole recessionary period. This kind of gives us a history of our tax caps and that CPI history. CPI stands for the Consumer Price Index. What that is it's an inflationary measure that shows the increases that taxing bodies can request on their tax levies. When you look at the averages going back to 1994, based on the tax years paid, the average has been about 2.35%. However, if you measure the last 7 years, 5 out of those 7 years, you see what happens there with that CPI. It's half of what it's traditionally been in terms of that. And this is our biggest indicator of the district's ability to generate new revenues. Unlike other businesses, we have our biggest revenue factors are from our taxes that is generated through the levy that we file, and then when it gets extended after it's run through the whole formulary process. And again, the main indicator there is that CPI index that provides us with the amount of an increase that we can ask year over year, not counting new properties. That's also another separate component from the formula that goes into the levy. But when you look at this, again, you can see that we're significantly hammered by what's taken place. And as I mentioned, so that recessionary period, you look at what happened in 2010, and it was basically flat. There was no growth, no increase, no opportunity for increased revenues for the district during that levy year. The second piece of our revenues, which we'll talk about in a little bit, is our state funding. And again, that piece has significantly taken a hit over the last 6 to 7 years. So when you hamper those two things and you couple them together, we've had a lot of challenges that we've been faced with during this time period, especially when you compare this line historically to where we were seeing. We go back to the heyday where it was over that 2.3% average. The district was seeing tax levies that were generating between $2 and $4 million of new revenues every year. And the last several years, we've been down under $1 million as a result of the CPI and coupling that with the tax caps structure that we're under in Cook County. Looking at our total revenues over the last number of years, you can see how this, as I mentioned in the previous slide, has impacted things. Our revenues have gone down from 2010 to 2015 as a result of mainly the combination of that reduced levy as well as reductions in state and federal funding. We don't have an ability to go out and change our market strategy like private companies do and do things to generate more revenues. We're very restricted in terms of school districts in terms of how we can generate revenues. Looking at our expenditures, on the other hand, you notice that our expenditures since 11 have decreased as well. And in light of everything that takes place with contracts, not only for staff, certified staff, support staff, and administrators, but all the other contracts that go into operating school districts, whether that be outsourced nursing services or outsourced sanitation services or pest control or maintenance contracts. All these different things that go into those don't go down from year to year. Those are going up on average of 3%. But we've held the line, we've done a good job, we feel, in negotiating all our varying contracts to hold the line on these expenditures. And it's resulted, and here you see how that looks. And this just kind of compares putting the revenues and the expenditures together. You can see in 2014 there, we were very close to those two lines meeting. We were very close to a balanced budget situation when you look at those two situations. Looking at our EAV history, EAV stands for Equalized Assessed Value, and what they do is take all the values of all of our taxing bodies throughout our communities and they total it up for the district. So that includes homeowners as well as business owners. And you can see the impact and the result of the decline in the housing market. And for those that sit on the board, particularly the Finance Committee, there's not a month goes by where we're not talking about a property tax appeal and whether or not we want to have the attorneys intervene on our behalf to negotiate a settlement. And we do that, and it's wise that we do, because if we didn't intervene, based on all the market trends and all the assessments that are going on out there, those numbers continue to drop. And it's become an automatic now for particularly our bigger business owners, and a lot of property tax owners are appealing their taxes these days because they don't feel that their house is valued at what they're being charged on their tax bills. So that's had a significant impact in terms of our EAVs. Now, inversely related to that is the tax rate history. Now, our tax rates have gone up. Now, people automatically look at this slide and they jump to it and say, well, the district, well, they're going crazy and they're killing me on my taxes and my rates are going through the roof. Because these rates are going up does not mean that the districts are increasing the amount of ask by what you see on these slides. The next slide will portray that and show you that it's simply not the case, but those two are inversely related. If those EAVs are declining like that, then the correlation is going to be that the tax rates are going to go up. The pot of money is the same, but where it's coming from is what triggers these two levels. Here's our extension history. Now, what that shows us, thank you. What that shows us is we submit a levy to the county. The county runs it through a process, and they run it through the limitation process, and then they provide us with our tax extension. That's the amount that we're actually going to receive from our tax collectors once all the tax bills are distributed. Now you can see a very slow increment here as you chart from 08 through 14. And if you look at the bottom caption there, despite the fact that the tax rates have gone up 2% during that period, the decreasing EAVs have offset the rate increase. And what that's resulted in is an increase of an average rate of about 1.7 over the past 7 years in terms of new monies that we're actually receiving. So the correlation between the first two graphs and this graph is a little bit different. But this shows really there has been some increment, but it has been a very steady, slow increment. And again, those tax caps play a big factor in that. The next slide is a very powerful slide. This shows our breakdown of expenditures and how the district has controlled our expenditures without the elimination of programs. If you look at the 2010 through 2015 period, and our salaries have increased by 0.9%, that's a significant piece of data. And that shows that everybody recognizes the financial situation of the district. And when you look at the contracts that have been negotiated, the unions have certainly recognized that, and they've made concessions. The administration has recognized that. And all three components that make up the salaries, our certified staff, our support staff, and our administration, have taken a hard freeze, meaning they didn't have any increase in salary from 1 year to the next for a 1-year period. And that's all happened in the last few years. So that's been a big contributor to limiting that. Our benefits, you see a 4.5% increase over that period. But again, if you compare that to trend data and you look at other districts, that's significantly low. The average trend data increase, you see increases in benefits anywhere from 7 to 9%. So 4.5% over that period is doing a pretty solid job. And we have an insurance committee in place, and we're going to continue to look at ways where we can control costs as we move forward pertaining to our benefits. Our purchase services has gone up just a 0.3% over this period. Again, another significant component. And part of that is bringing things back in district. A big piece of that we focused on the last couple of years is the certified maintenance staff. It's amazing looking at the data in terms of savings utilizing our staff in-house now versus automatically picking up the phone and making the call and outsourcing more significant problems. We now have those certified personnel on staff to address a lot of those issues, and it's paying dividends.
And if I can make a plug at this point, there's been some added stress and some frustration with our maintenance department that we've all known and heard about. But you think about, this is a 5-year difference, and it went up 0.3. That if we didn't do anything and we didn't ask our people to deliver more and they didn't respond, and again, with bumps and bruises along the way, that number would be significantly higher. So there were some personnel changes and some absolute stress, but in bottom line numbers, there's been some good work being done.
Our supplies number, it's gone down by 4.5%. It's hard to tell from those graphs, but that is a negative 4.5%. And again, it's really analyzing and combing through all of the spending that we do. And you can ask anybody in this room. I've all made a phone call to especially the principals, explain this, what's this for, what's the rationale for this, not only the principals, but supervisors, all the way, athletic directors, all the way on down the line. And it's everybody pulling in the right direction. When we started this endeavor under Dr. Kendall's leadership 9-10 years ago, there was a very different mindset and philosophy in the district. It was, hey, we have to spend everything that's in our budget because if we don't, then they won't give it to us next year. We've completely changed that mindset in the district. Now people realize, look, it's there. If I don't need to spend it, I know that it's going to roll back over into the general fund, and that's going to increase now fund balances moving forward into the next fiscal year, and it's going to reduce the difference between what we spent and what we took in. So the mindset has significantly changed, And that shows that there.
That's 4.5% in 5 years with prices going up. I don't know if we can get that any better. That's probably as good as it's going to get.
Yeah, and that's the old saying, you know, you're not going to be able to squeeze any more. We've squeezed everything we can out of it. It holds true, particularly when you look at supplies for services and even getting into out-of-district tuitions. Go ahead, Ben.
So if we look at these two, these are away from students. Again, when we talk about a change in the direction, if the direction is to have a balanced budget, it's not going to come out of here. There's nothing left and it just can't. So it comes out of programs, and programs come out of people, wherever that may be. Again, that's a board direction. The board direction that we had was maintain everything that we have, and I think we did just about everything. I'm pretty proud of this slide. There's a lot of work from a lot of different people, and a lot of, including our unions, including everybody, to get this to be as good as it is under the leadership of Tom and the gray hairs that everybody's got. This is significant. Let's talk about that last one there. We didn't get to special ed. Okay. Point 2, increase in 5 years with tuitions rising and out-of-district placements. You think about an out-of-district placement, every time we take one of our students and place them somewhere else, if it's a regular ed student, it's about $14,000. It can go up all the way to 35 from one student.
50 some.
50 some if it's really significant. So a lot of this, maintaining this, is bringing our students back, servicing them in-house. When you service people in-house, you have more staff. You have to have staff. So you think of the 0.9 and the 4.5, that's taking on more staff to address some students with significant needs, but providing services that we can do a lot of other things with. So again, I do a lot of figuring out how to do this. That's another great example of managing, and we'll talk about additions later. A lot of our additions came from how we manage our special ed department.
This next slide takes a look at basically our deficit and where it was in 2006. And you can see it's in around that $10.5 million mark, and where it ends up in 2015. And you can see, even though we haven't had a specific deficit reduction plan, we certainly have been taking into account watching this situation and trying to do the best that we can with that situation.
This is an odd slide. So I'm used to looking at slides where when things went up, it was above the line. This is going up below the line. Okay? And remember, before board direction, 2006 was before board direction. That's where we were. Without the direction and unification of the board saying, administrators, hey, do something, I don't know where that would have been.
You look at the bottom piece there, and I've heard me say this a number of times, but with the state situation, they've prorated our general state aid. And that has had a significant impact on us since fiscal year 2012. We have lost over $9.5 million in funding since they started this proration. And they're continuing the proration. This year, it's going up, right now anyways, it's projected to go up from the 87% proration last year to 92% proration this year. That is if we do in fact receive all of our monthly state aid payments. It could end up like it did last fiscal year, and in the fourth quarter they said, oh, well, yeah, we wanted to fund you at 89%, but the monies are just not there, so we're adjusting your proration down to 87%, which meant that the district had to take a $240,000 hit in the fourth quarter of a fiscal year, and we were able to absorb that because we positioned ourselves well for that. But there's other districts that, because of that, had to go out and they had to do some emergency borrowing to be able to pay their bills. And that's the reality of a lot of districts, particularly ones that are heavily reliant on state funding. Now this next slide is an interesting one as well. The dotted line adds in if we would not have received the proration, if we would have received the full general state aid dollars, exactly how we would have fared. And notice in 14 now, we're not below that line anymore. We're actually operating better than a balanced budget in 2014, and we come close in 2015, if you factor in those things.
So we've done a lot of reducing, but we reduced in order to maintain. We didn't reduce in order to balance the budget. So it's a significant difference. And if they would have, we could have, like the old saying goes.
This next slide takes a look at our fund balance reserves. And note that in 07, we borrowed $20 million. And then in 10, we borrowed $28 million. In 14, we borrowed $35 million. The philosophy and the practice that we put into place is we're maintaining that manageable deficit and we're borrowing to offset that deficit, but yet we're controlling that deficit significantly enough to continue to add to our fund balances as we go through time. And you can see 2010 through 13 represents paying off the deficits, and then you see that bump back up to where it is in 14, adding in that $35 million that the district borrowed.
And I like it to credit cards. We have basically 2 loans out now, and we're going to have 1 within a couple of years. A lot of districts have a bunch of different loans or a bunch of different credit cards stacked on top of each other, where they get to the point where they can't open another credit card or ask for more money.
Good point. We've significantly restructured our debt and the repayment of that debt, shortening up the term, which is generating a couple things. One is we're paying considerably less interest for that term and extending it out, assimilated to a mortgage. If you had a 30-year mortgage versus a 15-year mortgage, you're going to pay considerably less interest. You're going to have a better rate, number one, which is the case in our debt issuance, and you're going to pay that off much quicker, so the amount of interest that you're paying over time is significantly less as well. And that's what we've done, and that's had a big impact on things. And while we've borrowed, what we have not done is we haven't put additional burden on our taxpayers for the borrowing. We've structured our borrowing since we started back in that 07, 08 bond issue. We've structured that levy and we've maintained that level debt service payment so that our taxpayers aren't having that go up each year. But then those are 2 significant pieces as we look through this. Some of the financial threats that we face, and we've talked about some of these in my budget presentation, but we know we have a structural deficit, and we have to continue to monitor that, and we'll take the direction from the board, and we'll move forward with that. But we've got to make sure we maintain that manageable deficit, and if we're going to continue to do that, we need to look at continuing how we're going to operate moving forward. Another big one is this property tax freeze that they're continuing to talk about in Springfield. This would have a significant impact on not only our district, but all districts. That CPI that I referred to, that growth that we're able to extend or ask for through our levy would be eliminated for those years that they put that freeze in place. And this is very popular amongst both factions of politicians, the Republicans as well as the Democrats, because they can then go back to the taxpayers, their taxpayers, and tell them that they're freezing their taxes during that period. But in the meantime, all the taxing bodies that are reliant on those revenues that have expenditures going up each year are the ones that are going to suffer. So we're going to have to watch this closely and see what happens there. But we're looking at an annual hit of about $1.5 million if this were to go into place. Our average daily attendance, Dr. Williams mentioned this in her slide, our enrollment had gone down. As a result of that, that has an impact on our state aid that we have, above and beyond the proration. So we've seen that has been something else that we've absorbed over the last 4 years, is a decline in enrollment. Now, the good news is we're trending back up and it's going the other way, so we can see that average daily attendance start to go the other way. The way that works into our general state aid formula is they take our best 3 months average for a 3-year period to come up with that. So it's not, you're not going to see a big upswing automatically 1 year, because again, they're weighting the prior 3 years into that formula.
Well, but that was also done because we felt we had some people in our schools that didn't belong there. So with every piece of good news or with every good thing that you fix, there comes a downside to that. Once again, is it better to have students that don't belong in our district or our taxpayers? Probably not. If there's 1 or 2 of those that are special ed that are outsourced, that's a significant loss, but our fund goes down. So with every fix comes an equal and opposite reaction.
And there's a trade-off to that as well. If there's 400 less students in our district, then the staffing is going to go down, not significantly, but it is going to go down to reflect less of a need as far as that goes.
Every piece of good news, there's a piece of bad news.
The state funding crisis creates a lot of uncertainties in terms of revenues, and again, this ties back to that proration that I spoke of.
And this piece has made us way more conservative than we would like to be. So I know one of the questions is how are we, when we get to later on, how are we planning for this uncertainty? We're much more conservative. There's some really cool things that we can do that we just don't feel comfortable doing them now because of the picture's really fuzzy. So it forces us to be more conservative in the decision-making process.
Some of the opportunities, looking on the bright side. We're going to look at the bright side. We're going to see some savings generated from some of our staff retirements. Next year we have a significantly large retirement class. I think right now we're at 21 or 22, is that right, Mr. Guidance? For next year between all of our certified staff teachers and administrators. So that's going to have a significant impact on reducing the amount of salaries when you compare that to what the new salaries we're going to be replacing those staff with. The other component that factors into that is the benefit side. Typically, when you have staff retiring, in many cases they're in a family situation that has a much greater expense to it than hiring a new younger person that tends to be single, and now they're taking a single insurance versus a family insurance. So you're going to generate savings on that end as well. So we look forward to that for next year in terms of helping us maintain some of our costs. The state of Illinois temporarily raised the state budget. Governor Rauner passed this general state aid proration impact grant into legislation. We're slated to receive $422,000 this fiscal year. The budget that we passed 2 weeks ago does not even have those figures in it, because I didn't feel comfortable, again, talking like Dr. Kendall mentioned, being very conservative. I didn't feel comfortable putting that in it because I don't think we're going to get those dollars. Now, if we do, that's significant. That will be a great benefit to the district, but that budget does not include those dollars at this particular time. Outstanding debt in the district is approaching historically low levels. We've utilized this debt, as I mentioned, to address our deficit spending, and we've done it without having to impact the things that we do in this district. And not only that, you're going to see all the additions that we've created over the last several years. And the smaller deficits allowed us to shorten up our repayment schedule. We're anticipating a manageable deficit of that $6 million mark. But if you go back to that previous deficit slide, you'll see that for the last several years, we've been well under that. So what that is doing is growing our fund balances as we move forward. And we're slowing down the erosion of those fund balances. And those fund balances are generating interest for us as well. So significant components. Now, creating a mechanism to withstand the crisis without impacting the learning, and providing the ability to look at addressing some major capital needs without increasing any current annual levy. And those are things that the board will be faced with in the future. Decisions and challenges that we'll have that we'll talk through, and we'll get direction from the board, and we'll move forward and act on that direction.
And I think the piece that gets stuck in my mind as a novice financial person is when you pay off this debt, you think you're done with your debt. We still haven't answered the bigger problem, and we're going to have to answer that bigger problem. So I don't want you to think that, oh, we're going to get this paid off, we're done with having debt. That's just not the case under the current direction.
This takes a look at our current outstanding debt and some of our previous debt. The red bars show what is current, 11 through 14, and the blue there, that is debt that has been restructured and or retired. But the key thing to note on this slide is notice where that line is. It's not gone up and down, it's not gone up, it's remained constant. So we've maintained our extension for our non-capped funds. The district's ability to levy for bond issue is considered non-capped. So that's outside of the tax caps that we levy for. So we have that ability to go to our taxpayers to cover the dollars that we spend, and what we've done is we've held that consistent as we move forward to manage things. Now this next slide, this projects out if the direction of the board is to continue our past practice. What we'd be looking to do is extend out another bond issue of $35 million in new debt, or somewhere in and around that amount. And we would stack that on so that you see the current debt, we would stack that new debt in green on top of that so that we maintain, again, that tax rate level for that debt service that we're asking of the taxpayers. It's not going to go up, it's not going to go down, but we maintain that. And if we didn't do that, if we didn't have that green drop in there in 2019, that debt actually rolled off, you'd see that would have an impact with our taxpayers, but it wouldn't be a significant impact. I haven't done the calculations on that yet to see how much it would drop off, but again, we're talking probably less than $100 impact on taxpayer bills for that year if we let that roll off. But then if we were to wait a year and then add that back in, now you're going to see that shoot back up. And again, that's where you're going to get taxpayers that are going to be screaming about not only their tax rates going up, but screaming that their actual bills have gone up. And again, we're not saying that tax bills haven't gone up, because we're entitled to that inflationary component that we ask the taxpayers for, but what we're talking about here is a separate and a side piece that we're looking at for the debt component of this only. This takes a look at our fund balance projection. That black line represents 3 months of our fund balance reserves. And that's a significant piece for the district, is we have those reserves and we have the ability to continue to replenish those reserves for I won't say an unlimited time, but for a long ways into the foreseeable future, which is a significant component that our district has that many other districts don't have. In a given year, we can have $11.3 million of debt on the books that we can be paying off. That's a huge debt service extension base that most districts don't have. If you look at that 3-month fund balance, we get that by taking our budget or our annual expenditures or projected expenditures, dividing that by 12 and then multiplying it by 3. So we're at about $22.5 million there, provides us with the line of 3-month reserves. You can see we're significantly over that, almost double that as we look at the 16-17 years, and then it starts to erode down as you take $6 million away each year, which again, that's all ties in with that manageable deficit piece. We know we're going to be doing that, and we know we're going to utilize the monies that we borrowed to cover those costs. Now this is what that would look like if we decided, and the board gave us the direction to go out and add in that $35 million borrowing in 2018. And again, now we've just replenished our fund balance reserves, and you can see where those numbers go up considerably. In doing that, that would address or give us the ability to address some potential future capital projects, as well as offset future deficits, and position us very well to address any financial situations that come our way. And whether the state, again, prorates general state aid, or whether they impose a tax freeze, or whether one of the other things that I mentioned before didn't include in the slide, but it is if they adjust the current way that TRS is funded, if they make a shift back onto local districts to cover more of a component of what goes into TRS, that our district would be very well positioned to sustain any of those hits. Now, we look at the financial components, and we've showed you how we've maintained and stabilized things financially, but these next few slides are going to show you not only did we maintain what we had, but these are all enhancements that we've added in each year. So when you factor in what you're going to see here with those fund balances on those previous slides, and then you compare us to surrounding districts and what's going on in surrounding districts, we've done an incredible job of staying the course and following the board's direction that's been given to us.
So I think this is a great example of increase academics and maintain a manageable budget deficit. So everything you're going to see here is done with those two things in mind, knowing that our free and reduced lunch population, our at-risk students, were growing at the time. When you have that issue, you're going to have to give more support. If you ignored that, you would have seen in Corey's presentation those academic numbers going in the wrong direction. So you're seeing two numbers, academic and financial, going in the right path.
The first piece here, it pertains to academic things that we've added in. Now, again, these come not only by providing additional services for our students, but also adding staff. So there's costs involved with all of these things. And we've worked with, again, our unions, and we've created positions to be as fiscally responsible as possible while providing the supports with the staff that's needed to put these things in place. And so in 10-11, we added a freshman learning center at Bremen, and that incorporated a coordinator and 2 tutors into that program. We also added a PALS program at Hillcrest High School. We had a PALS program in place here at Bremen High School for a number of years. We found that to be successful, and it started out as a pilot program, but then we said, you know what, we need to expand this program out and provide some of these supports for our other students. And at the time, some of the district students were being moved over to Bremen that needed to be involved in that PALS program. Dr. Penn?
That PALS program brought some student challenges to the district. These students we know are going to need emotional support, and they're going to act out and act differently. So bringing those in was an impact on our entire staff. But I think it's twofold. One, it's helped our staff develop strategies to expand the group of students that they can deal with and handle and become creative with this challenge. The other piece, we have about 100 PALS students in our district. 100 PALS students right now times $26,000, what we were doing in an old system generates $2.6 million worth of opportunity. It's either reducing the deficit or adding support. So a lot of the support you're going to see are direct relation to bringing those students back. We also have a Bridges program, which is another higher level. Right now that's, and I hate to talk about students generating income. That sounds kind of awkward, but in reality it is. That's generating about $182,000.
But while generating the income, the students are in a much better environment from everything that we've heard from staff and then the students and the parents alike. So it's a win-win all the way around.
I feel more comfortable talking about that end than the dollar end, but I figured I'd have to throw in the dollar piece.
On the capital side, capital needs side, we've done a number of enhancements as well. We replaced 2 pool boilers, we replaced a domestic hot water boiler, we replaced the southwest section of one of our school roofs, we replaced the south elevation of our windows, we replaced the entire roof on one of our schools, we replaced 28 rooftop HVAC units on one of our schools, we had new parking lot lighting, and we also updated our BAS system. That stands for Building Automation System. That's our controls that control all of our HVAC equipment. So we can dial in, tighten up schedules, and be more energy efficient. In terms of technology, and this isn't everything, this is just some of the bigger things that we've done in technology. And keep in mind, when I talk about technology, we've reduced the amount of the dollars that we budget for technology every single year from 210 all the way moving forward. So we're doing all these things, but yet the amount of dollars that we're spending to do these things has gone down. We've done a server virtualization project. We've replaced 257 computers throughout the district, and we have a rotationary cycle for computers. We look at the classroom needs, we look at labs, we look at IMCs, we look at support staff computers, we look at administrative computers, and all those are on a rotational cycle. So every 4 or 5 years, we're upgrading our technology as we swap out computers.
One of the problems with all of these, they're really responsible and somewhat boring. They're not exciting for our communities. They're stuff that's necessary that we had to do.
And while that said, we feel very proud of our buildings and our facilities. If you walk our buildings, our high schools, and you walk another district's high schools and you compare, you're going to see that we'll stack up against anybody in terms of the condition that our buildings are in. And we've got some old facilities, especially when you talk about our 2 oldest buildings in Bremen and in Tinley Park High School. But the way we've maintained them, the renovations that we've made to get them to look the way that we've done, the pride that our support staff has in keeping our buildings clean and preparing them on a daily basis for our students. Again, we'll stack those up against any district in the state as far as that goes. So while some of these things are boring, again, we still feel very proud of our accomplishments as we move forward. We've installed 49 classroom interactive projector systems. So that's the projector and the interactive whiteboard, another tool that greatly enhances the learning for our teaching staff. That was in 10-11. Looking at 11-12 on the academic end, we said, you know what, this FLC thing has been a great success at Bremen. We're going to roll that out in our other 3 buildings. and make sure that we're putting the supports in place for all of our freshman students, because we've done a lot of research and data to show that that's a critical year and transition time for those students. And the more we can support those students and stay on top of those students and make sure that they're successful and they're passing their courses, the better they're going to be over the long haul of a 4-year high school career, and the more prepared they're going to be for going on after that. And so we added 3 coordinators, 3 tutors on the math end, and 3 tutors on the English end. Our PALS program that we added the year before at Hillcrest, we said, you know what, that's another thing. It's making great strides. Let's open this up. The principals came to us. This came right from the principals and said, hey, look, we want a PALS program in our buildings. And we said, okay, it makes sense from a student perspective as well as from a cost perspective. And we analyze and evaluate all these decisions with everyone's input, but we move forward with that. And so, again, we continue to provide some additional special needs students with assistance. We've kept some special ed students in our buildings where our students have told us they'd much rather be, and they're with other kids that they're used to being with. It's a better learning environment for them, and we've cut down on that cost of outsourcing overall by adding that. We added college and career centers at all 4 of our high schools to help our students and assist them in identifying the colleges that they could be interested in, the scholarship opportunities that are available for them, and the college and career centers have had significant increases in the number of students that they're getting applying to colleges. And so we've made enhancements there. Technically, we added computers, we added some staff to make those things happen.
And I think it is October is college application month. So the goal of the people that are in the College and Career Center is every senior submits an application somewhere. If that's South Suburban or wherever it is, they're meeting with them individually to make sure that that's taken care of. It's a service that's above and beyond what most high schools are doing.
Looking at the capital needs, we continue with window replacement on the west elevation of one of our buildings. We sandblasted and renovated the exterior columns, which were determined to be failing. So we've got those back up to where they needed to be. We replaced domestic water lines in one of our buildings. We continued with some abatement. We remodeled an IMC, and we replaced gym doors in that particular year. Looking at technology again, we replaced over 489 computers and 56 interactive whiteboards, along with purchasing 124 iPads for staff, as well as 300 classroom printers that are utilized by our teachers.
Remember we talked last week about change being slow, and the process takes a long time. We started talking about iPads in 2011. That's when we started focusing on our one-to-one. Putting aside.
Looking at the 12-13 year, academically we added some additional supports in 2 social workers and 2 additional psychologists. We also added 2.5 guidance counselors, beefing up the staff and the resources for our students. And then we said this freshman learning center is great, but you know what, we can't forget about the rest of our students. They need some supports as well. So in that year we added our upper class learning centers at all 4 of our schools. Again, making sure that our students are on track and providing additional health resources for them. And it's made a significant improvement, particularly when you look at our failure data that Dr. Williams presented. Our students are passing a much higher number of courses. Dr. Kavelkas, I read your newsletter, and I think, was it 94% pass rate? Is that accurate for your students up to this point right now at Bremen High School? That's significant work being done, and a lot of that is attributed to all the efforts of our teaching staff to recognize when students are in trouble and to funnel them into these learning centers that we've provided for them. So the efforts are paying off. In terms of our capital needs, we did continuation of abatement and window replacement. We looked at the main entrance for 2 of our schools. We repaired and we rerouted 2 of our pools, hallway abatement, and that included new tile. We replaced domestic water lines. We replaced the fire alarm system. We renovated the cafeteria and front entrance and the wall of fame area at one of our schools. We replaced all 4 of our tracks. We looked at 2 of them needed work, and we were able to go to the various vendors that do that work, and we were able to negotiate a significant price for doing all 4 through one of our vendors. So we got all 4 for the cost of 2, and that's what prompted us to do all 4 that particular year. We continue to do tuck pointing maintenance at all 4 of our schools, areas that need addressing, and we did a carpet replacement in one of our building's main offices. Looking at technology, we had 283 computers replaced that year. We replaced our financial and HR software with Infinite Visions. Was a significant change for us. That's paid its dividends and been very successful. We installed 56 interactive projector systems that year. We purchased an additional 54 iPads for staff. We upgraded our phone system, and we did a network upgrade in 2012-13. Looking at 13-14, again, continuing with abatement, we replaced a pool gutter system. We did various concrete replacement projects throughout, eradicating some dangerous situations, particularly on walkways for our students. We upgraded some of our baseball bleachers, and again, making them ADA and resolving issues. We replaced the sound system, and we replaced flooring in one of our office areas. 334 computers this year. We had 56 projector systems. We installed a new camera security recording system. We installed new cameras at the Ad Center, and we did a storage upgrade for our network storage in the district office. Looking at last year, we added 2 additional .5 counselors, so that brought the total up to 4 counselors per school. We did teacher training on one-to-one implementation so that our teachers were prepared and ready for the one-to-one rollout that took place this year. We did training for our new tech assistant program. So we took some kids that were interested and we trained them to be our liaisons when students or staff are having a problem. And we have that program in place for this year, and it's going very well. In terms of capital, we renovated our family and consumer science lab. We replaced the east doors at one of our schools. We replaced flooring in the staff area. We again continued with some tuck pointing. We did another IMC renovation. We did a renovation of band and choir rooms, and we secured main entrances. We added the secured main entrances at all 4 of our schools. And that was funded through a $130,000 grant that we applied for and we received. In terms of technology, we upgraded our Master Manager scanners throughout the district. We replaced 452 computers, 22 projectors, 185 iPads for staff. We upgraded our Wi-Fi system so that we were ready for that one-to-one. We thought our system was okay, but then when we did our research and we met with Apple, and we realized that we were going to have some potential problems, and we did not want technology to be a hassle for the staff, and we wanted it to be a smooth transition. So we had to make sure that we had our Wi-Fi system upgraded and ready to go, and in doing so, we added 396 access points throughout our campuses. We added 6 new security cameras per building and 12 additional Prox readers for exterior doors. Prox readers are, you take your key fob or your card and you swipe it, and that allows you access into the building. And it records who that was, it's time-stamped, so we can go back and check those things. Those things were all covered through grant funds. Looking at the 15-16 academic year, we had the one-to-one implementation of iPads for all of our freshmen and all of the remaining teachers that weren't previously trained they had the option of receiving an iPad, and we're going through training for those teachers as well. Looking at our capital needs, we replaced a pool filter and boiler. We replaced the domestic hot water tank and boilers with 99.9% of the system. We did tuck pointing to all 4 of our schools. We replaced 3 Mammoth units, and we added additional controls in one of our buildings to truly provide comfort and regulate temperatures for our students and our staff in one of our buildings where that's been an ongoing problem for a while. We replaced the domestic hot water tanks in one of our buildings. We replaced our minivan fleet. Again, we talked about that at the Finance Committee. We went out and negotiated a deal on that, and the deal that we had, it made absolute sense to go ahead and, instead of just replacing that one vehicle that was totaled because it was sideswiped, we were able to get a minivan fleet replaced now. They're 2015s. They're all covered under warranty, whereas our previous fleet was now out of warranty. So again, we're starting to run into some costs there. And we ordered a new pickup with a plow to address our snow removal needs. That should be here in about 4 weeks. So,
Which should reduce outsourcing and overtime.
yes,
We're
absolutely.
using what's been our solution in the past.
And then from a technology standpoint, this year we've replaced 492 computers. We've purchased 1,400 new iPads for our freshman students. We have 150 new iPads for our staff, and we've upgraded our firewall to keep things secure as far as our network goes from the outside world. And as we approved last board meeting, the Decision Ed software is also a component of our budget for this year. Some administrative savings that we've done over the last several years. We had a director of technology that resigned. We did not replace that director. Instead, we utilized the 2 people that were there, and we shifted responsibilities and duties for those people, generating savings. We did a similar thing when we had the director of educational support staff retire a few years ago. We restructured that position, and then we hired out of that role at a significantly less salary our director of facilities. So we got better, but we generated the savings in doing so, because now we had a true professional to oversee our facilities, our custodial, and our maintenance staff, and really bring some direction to that area. We had our 10-month administrative staff. We restructured their contracts, removing them from the teacher's salary schedule. This is a significant piece because our 10-month administrators, which makes up the good majority of our administrators, they were paid under the guidelines of the collective bargaining agreement. So they were paid a salary, and then on top of that, they were paid an administrative stipend. And on top of that, they were able to turn in hourly blue sheets for any work that they did. For example, covering after-school detentions or before-school detentions was a common occurrence that we would see blue sheets from our administrators. We restructured all of that. We said we no longer have the ability to stay on that teacher's contract and have the automatic step movement, as well as opportunities for lane advancements. And we eliminated the blue sheeting component. We said we're restructuring your salaries, and you now are paid a salary, and that encompasses all these other hourly things that used to take place. So we're going to run the numbers to see exactly what the actual savings were, but when we did this, we projected over $2.3 million in savings over a 5-year period when we implemented it. So that was a significant piece.
And I know there's been a question about insurance and pensions for administrators. That was the answer, so we didn't lose our administrators at the time. They knew they weren't going to get that increase, that step and raise for the rest of their career. The board's offering at that time was the insurance, TRS.
And that was, at that time, we were operating under a flat installment for insurance. It wasn't a percentage of what the renewal was. It was a flat dollar amount that the staff was paying, and I think the year that we implemented that, it was around $1,200 flat fee, and that included up to family coverage as well. So at that time, the thinking was, well, for $1,200, we can absorb that, we can retain all of our administrative staff. It's something that we can give them, because over here we took a bunch of things away from them, and it allowed us to retain our staff. But it wasn't a significant hit that the board observed, because, like I said, it was that flat dollar amount. Now, it has changed since then, because in terms of the certified staff and the support staff, it's on a percentage of renewal, so that amount has gone up and increased in terms of, if you compare that to what the staff are paying versus what the board's picking up for those 10-month administrators. We had 2 administrative situations where we had people resign, and we did not replace those. And those had significant savings attached to them as well. Financial profile information. This is an important piece, because this is an outside entity basically grading how the district is done financially. And we'll see comparisons to us versus all the other districts in the state. But just to give you a little background and information on what this does is it looks at the state's overall average scores, and it compares school districts earning the lowest financial ratings. 1/3 of the students in the state are in schools in poor financial health. And this is coming right from the state board website. You look at the statewide data in terms of Illinois and the public schools, and we're continuing to struggle financially. And that's no secret to anybody. Nearly 62% of our districts are deficit spending based on a year-old data. That's doubled from 2008 when you look at when that was at 32%. So because the state is in crisis, because they've cut funding to districts, because many districts are heavily reliant on that funding, you're seeing more and more districts end up in the deficit spending. So what we're doing and what we've been doing is no anomaly, and you're going to see that trend continue as things become more and more difficult. Here are the 4 designations that the state will give to a district, and they run through a formulary process, and based on where your score comes out, you then are assigned a designation or a rating. And starting at the bottom, the financial watch, that's a district from a 1 to a 2.6. And there's specific criteria that school code sets forth for districts that fall into this financial difficulty. And they would qualify for an oversight panel from the state. When we talked about our adoption of our budget, I had mentioned there's no deficit reduction plan required for our district. That's a component that you see there, that Article 1A-8 of the school code. If you're on that financial watch designation, you're required to and mandated to complete and comply with that 3-year deficit reduction plan. The same holds true if you look at a step up, the early warning, 2.6 to a 3.07. You also have to meet the criteria, and you have to complete a deficit reduction plan, and you have to work to follow that plan. The next one, moving towards the top, is the financial review, a 3.0 to a 3.5, and there's not a lot in terms of regulations that happens with districts that fall under review. The highest designation is the financial recognition, and that's a 3.5 to a 4.0, and that's districts requiring little or no review from this all comes from the Illinois State Board of Education. This isn't anything that the district does, it's all comprised and generated from ISBE. This just shows you some profile history information. You see in 2009, there were 626 districts that were in recognition. You see in 2015, that number dropped significantly, and there's 553 districts that are in recognition, that highest rating provided by ISBE. The review didn't change a whole lot, but if you look at warning and watch, you'll see growth that's taking place there. As that funding gets cut and reduced, more and more districts are trending towards the right, falling towards that watch designation versus the other way around. As I mentioned, almost 60%, over 60% of the districts now are deficit spending in the state of Illinois. This shows you the district's financial profile, and I'm very proud of this. In 2006, when we showed that big deficit, you see where we were. We were in early warning designated by the state. I think it was 6.
I think we inherited early.
Yeah, I think I inherited early warning, that's right. So one of the things when I came into my position, after having a year before Dr. Kendall started to analyze everything, I came to him and I said, look, we're in trouble here. We've got to do some things, and we've got to change the mindset of this district. And I credit him because the first thing he did was made his first goal fiscal responsibility.
Second.
Well, that was the first thing that I told him. But I mean, those two were hand in hand when he adopted and formulated his goals with the board. And it wasn't just something that was thrown out there, it was a goal. We had consistent, regular meetings constantly talking about our finances at a very critical, analytical level. And everything was scrutinized and reviewed and looked at. And the combination of the years of efforts generate where we're at today. You know, we retained that review, we quickly moved out of warning, and we retained that review for a 5-year period. But now I'm proud to say we're in that recognition period, and we're projecting that shows unaudited. The auditors will finalize the audit in next month. But again, we're projecting to be in that recognition, that top level. So when you look at everything that we've done and all the things that we've talked about, again, that's something that, an achievement that I'm very proud of that the district has attained through all the efforts of everyone throughout the district. No one particular person made that happen. It's everybody believing in what the goal is and everybody working towards accomplishing that goal.
And the direction set by the school.
Absolutely. You're stealing my thunder.
Oh, sorry. Told you I was going to walk that.
This next slide is another way of looking at our historical deficit. And the direction has been to maintain the manageable deficit. But this slide truly demonstrates that under the Board of Education's direction and the leadership of the superintendent, we've not only maintained the manageable deficit, we've reduced the deficit while maintaining programs and adding a number of additional supports for our students. There's not many districts in the state of Illinois that can say those same accomplishments as what we've done during this period. And that's significant. Particularly, again, when you go back to that slide, if we would have received the proration that we've lost, now those below the bar numbers, those negative numbers, they turn positive one year and they get significantly reduced for many others. So we're very proud of the efforts that we've done. We know we still have a long way to go, and we know the challenges are going to be large, but again, we feel confident, all working together, that we will continue to be successful. This last slide, and this isn't everything, but this is some of the things that as I look back between 11 and 16, over the last 6 to 8 years, we've carefully analyzed all of our spending that we've done each year, and we've incorporated ways that we were able to limit the growth of those expenditures, or we were able to reduce those expenditures. And contracts is a big component. contracts for all of our staff, contracts for our vendors, reductions in our operations and our outsourcing, reductions in our purchase services, grant dollars that we've attained. In the last few years, we have reached over $277,000 in grants attained, mainly facility and energy related due to the efforts of the facility director. And those are things that are all new to the district, and he's found, because of his knowledge and his ability to go out and look for these things, that's generated significant dollars in revenues for us. Administrative positions, we've looked at those, we've restructured those, we've eliminated some, and those are things that we will continue to look at. But you look at that savings there during that period of over $7 million, and again, it just demonstrates the effective work that we've all done. We've positioned ourselves very well in terms of the future, despite all of the challenges that we're going to have. And considering all the things that we've done to enhance the district, again, we feel confident in our efforts that we've provided for our taxpayers, for our students, and for our staff. Again, under the direction of the board and with the leadership of Dr. Kendall and the team that we've had in place, we feel very good about things. We'll take some questions on anything in terms of this presentation, and then I know there's some other questions that we'll get to.
Does anyone want to break before we go to this? Yeah.
Sure.
Have we gotten any state aid this budget year?
We have.
So
Yeah.
despite not having a budget, we're still getting?
We are getting our general state aid payments, yes.
Okay, and my other question is the, and I've been also closely following the freezing the property taxes. Is there a component tied to that would freeze the debt service use as well? I know when tax caps came in, quite frankly, that was one of the games that we played early in my tenure here, that if you didn't have any debt, you could only issue debt based on whatever you had at the time that was put in place. Is
Correct.
that similar to what's going on now?
I have not heard that component of it yet, so,
Yeah, it's a good one.
yeah. But that's something that we'll have to take a look into. Because you're exactly right, when tax caps came in, it was the debt extended districts had at that time is what set your debt service extension base. And fortunately for us, ours was high in comparison to other districts. So
And it
that
was high by design, not
it was
by
high.
design.
No, exactly. It was an unbelievably prudent move on the board's part and the administration at that time to drive that level up. That created that $11.3 million that we're able to have on the books currently. But I have not heard that it would tie that to your existing levels.
The other thing I just read in the paper yesterday is we may not see a budget till April after the primary elections, which is just frankly amazing in itself. But you can't believe everything you read in the paper. Hopefully that's-
Anybody else?
I was just have a question, and maybe we've asked this before, maybe it's, what is a .5 guidance counselor? Is that someone that shares their time or something in school?
Correct.
What do you mean, they just share time?
It would, right, exactly.
At one time.
At one time, right, that was
You'll
since
see
expanded.
we added them twice. There was one where they worked part-time. and
Right.
We made them all full-time.
Now they're all full-time.
Yes.
Tom, you mentioned the 10-month administration was given the insurance benefit to make up for land loss. Was that even given to 12-month administration?
No,
or was it just
12-month, it was already a component of the 12-month
So
administration.
they had already had the
They had already
insurance
had the
benefits.
insurance, that's correct.
Okay.
How are we doing the bridges? Excuse me. You mentioned 182,000 that we were generating. How are we generating that? That's state aid.
No, that's well, it's not generated, it's not real money, money's not going out. So we're not paying tuition for those. It's not really cash that we're receiving.
And what actually is the Bridges program? Because I haven't.
Lucy, you want to take that?
The Bridges program is a district-wide self-contained program for students with social emotional disorders. So instead of having to find out-of-district placements, which cost us anywhere, with a cooperative base, $25,000 to private tuition, which can be $50,000. We're keeping them in-house in a self-contained program with a small staff-student ratio, access to a social worker, one teacher, so that expectations are clear across the board and they're not having to travel class to class.
So it's more of an elementary model. They stay in one room. Where our regular PALS program, they access the entire general education program.
Is that one of the ones that just came about in the last 3-4 years?
2 years.
2 years.
We're in the second year of it.
Okay. Last 2 years.
How's it for us? So if you're in the neighborhood, you ever want to take a walk down there, I'll introduce you to the kids and the teachers, show you around.
I mean, I think it's necessary. Because so many children are going close.
You don't know?
Yeah, that's the only one I have for right now. Yeah, go ahead.
Tom, on this chart here,
Yeah.
that we talked about these areas of the annual expense growth, okay? I think you'd mentioned the purchase services and the supplies were pretty much capped out as far as going firm savings in those areas, right? So pretty much leaves the other three categories, which you didn't mention anything out of district tuition, but that's pretty low as it is.
Right.
Okay, and then the other two obviously are salaries and benefits. Can you just talk a little bit about, if you had to make some reductions in those areas, where you would attack and how you would attack those areas?
Well, again,
That's our job.
No, I'm just saying, give us some examples. Because if we're supposed to give them
We should be giving
direction.
him direction. He shouldn't be telling us where we should go.
No, you're missing my point, Evelyn. If you're going to come and give us examples, or if I'm asking you for some examples so I can make an educated vote, as Evelyn says that we'll have to do on things like that, I guess I would like to know, as our finance director, how you would attack these areas.
well, there's a number of things.
Without,
You go ahead.
no, go ahead.
Well, you want to say without cutting staff or...
No, I wasn't going to say that.
What were you going to say?
No,
That would be helpful.
So let's start on that first column there, the benefits. Where do you see that we could make true, genuine savings in that area?
Well, I think we've established that the retirements will do that, so we're poised to do that coming up in 17. So
For 18.
that you're going to see.
So that's going to
something
happen
down.
pretty much on its own.
That's the first one.
Right.
Right,
Okay, so-
but if you think about our negotiation of a new salary schedule was a big part of that, knowing that we were going from this opportunity to this new opportunity. So that was one of the first.
And there's more money being paid into benefits by both BEST and JFA.
Correct.
Which will change.
Yes, over the life of the contract, that's going to, there'll be more dollars there to generate offsetting the cost.
But that was not done without work already. So that was the first one. We've already done a big piece of it.
So your idea is if you came to the board and said, hey, listen, we have 3 things here I'd like to propose to you. Or maybe you just have 1 or 2 in your head right now. I'd like you to share it with us.
Well, again, there's a
Outside of
number
what
of
Dr.
ways.
Kendall said as far as the retirement.
There's a number of ways that you can address particularly these first 2 buckets. As we talked about before, the biggest component of any budget in any school district is those first 2 components, salaries and then followed up by the benefits. So how are there ways that we can have as little impact on students as possible, but yet not impact things? But one of the things that we've talked about, and again, this would have to be a direction from the board, but right now, in terms of our required credits for graduation, we're well above what the state requires in terms of that. So if that was reduced, if students didn't need to take as many classes, then what that's going to do is have a trickle-down effect on the staff that you need to provide those services.
But that's not a recommendation we would make if the board's direction is to manage the deficit that we have. If the direction was to eliminate the debt, then we would start to make those recommendations. So I'm very hesitant to say we're going to do this, 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 and this, because that's not the direction.
In order for the board to deliberate on anything, you would come to us with a directive, or maybe in lack of better terms, giving us a couple of ideas.
I think what Bill's
before
saying,
we would take it into consideration, correct?
Is he?
So where would that come from? Would that come from you as the finance director, or would that come from you?
First he needs to be told, as a board, we want you to get rid of this deficit.
Okay.
Because that's not happened. I don't think your thought
Yeah, I
process.
mean,
And
there-
it
there's-
certainly wouldn't be Tom by himself. It wouldn't be any of us by ourselves. The recommendation would come from the superintendent based on a heck of a lot of work by a lot of people to brainstorm the best opportunity. And I don't know what that is right now, so I don't want Tom to come
and
off.
I constantly hear that, classes will have to be cut, programs will have to be cut. Surely there's got to be other ways, other areas to attack first before we get to that.
A lot of those areas have already been attacked. That's why it went
Donna,
from
here it
11
is.
to
We're
4.
looking at it.
Yeah,
So what would you
What's
recommend?
left?
Well,
Look at it,
again,
Larry,
I'm
that's what's
hesitant
left.
to make
Gotta
any
fix this now.
recommendations now because I don't want to push any panic buttons.
I'm not asking to make recommendations, official recommendations. I'm just trying to engage you in a conversation as our finance
Yeah.
director.
Well, again, we would look at the staffing component and try to keep that as far away from our students as possible. So when you look at that, if you're not talking about impacting them, then what other staff is left? Now you look at administrators and you look at support staff and focusing and zeroing on those two areas.
Or you look at developing special ed programs where actually your staffing is going to go up, but your tuition savings is going to be greater. So this is not an easy answer that we can do and give you some quick things. There would be a lot of work. If the direction of the board is, Bill, give us some ideas about a deficit reduction plan, and even for just to kick it around, that's going to take a lot of Corey arguing with Tom, arguing with Lisa, arguing with me, because whatever Tom does in isolation is certainly going to affect academic achievement. So it's not a one person over another. It's together, and that would take a long time to do.
If I could jump in on the out-of-district placements real quick, it is very low, our change. However, there's always opportunities to move students from really restrictive placements to less restrictive placements. I think of some students we have based on team decisions, which is how a decision to go to one of those placements is made. Students at a $50,000 a year placement, maybe we can't bring them back to the actual district building, but could we bring them to our local cooperative, which costs us $25,000 a year as opposed to $50,000. So my team is constantly looking at those placements and can we meet those students' needs in locations with the services that are less restrictive, which is what IDEA, the law dictates we do. So while we're very low right now, there still are opportunities to be constantly analyzing that, constantly looking at where are we housing our students, what services are we providing, and can we provide them either in our homeschool buildings or in our local cooperative, which is far less expensive than some of our places we have in like Bolingbrook or different locations we utilize.
What's that? Okay, so maybe I'm a little bit confused here. The IEP says least restrictive environment, right? So that we're always looking at that,
Always
correct?
looking at that. However, the student needs dictate what a least restrictive environment is. For some students, a least restrictive environment is a very therapeutic, self-contained, expensive private placement
Sure.
where the staff-to-student ratio is 4:1, and they have a social worker, an occupational therapist, a physical therapist, a deaf and hard of hearing itinerant. They have a lot of staff, which leads to a lot of cost for the district. So we're constantly looking at those placements as well.
But haven't we been working on that since 2013? I mean, since I've been here, 2013? believe Ms. Tanisha was here, she had like 2 programs in place working on that, and we're still working on those.
Yeah, we're constantly looking at how can we serve our students.
And then just
Always.
last year, I think we changed and even made it more in-house.
That was
Is that what now?
the addition of our Bridges program.
Okay,
Those
that's
four
what Bridges
PALS
program.
programs
4 PALS, okay.
at the 4 buildings. Our Excel program housed here at Bremen for significant savings to the district. So we're constantly looking at why are we sending kids out and could those services be provided in-house instead?
Can you say how much it is, about how much it was? How much it was in savings, because it was hundreds of thousands of dollars that we saved by.
Bridges, I think, Dr. Kendall mentioned, so if we have 7 kids in that
182.
program, 22, and we're spending 29,000, so that's a significant amount. And our Excel program here at Bremen, we have approximately 39 kids. Normally, we would have to have outplaced all of those kids at a cost of about 30,000 each. So I think that's around 1.5 million. So we do have to pay staff and salaries for that, but we're still providing those students an opportunity to be in their homeschool district, be in a less restrictive environment with access to the general curriculum, access to their same age, non-disabled peers, which is what IDEA dictates we do.
And Excel is a great idea where both things elevated at the same time. Most of the stuff is you address the finance piece, but you're going to suffer academically, or you address the academics and you suffer financially. Special ed, our experience has been we've grown on both ends and profited financially as well. So we'll continue to look into that.
Do we work with the co-op? It's a co-op that's nearby. I can't remember the number. Southwest co-op.
So we have a number of students that attend their program. Not as many as we used to, but that's how we reduce the number who attend there, because we provide programs in-house for them.
And we've affected the co-op by bringing our PALS programs back and our Excel program. They've had to reach to the next level of private placement and bring those students back locally, which reduces tuition as well.
So that brings it to us basically, because it's
It brings us from private to the co-op, from co-op to our school, from Bridges to PALS to our regular. So every movement closer to regular ed saves you some money.
It saves you money, but it also
It's better for the
is
student.
better for the student.
And it's
Because
the
it
law.
integrates into the regular.
And it's the law,
We're not going to say regular, but
as close as we can get.
Right.
Right. Absolutely.
Regular education class.
Tom, back in, and I'm going to try to jog your memory a little bit here, okay? Back in 2006, can you explain, obviously I wasn't here, I think Evelyn was doing one here. What was the board directive like? And Evelyn, if you can help us out with this too. To start working on that deficit at that time, if you can remember how it was directed to the administration to work on the deficit.
That's a very good question. The leadership was completely different back then, so I don't know that there was a leadership working in sync with the Board of Education to provide a direction back at that time.
Who was board president?
Niemeyer.
Well, how did we, not we, I wasn't there, but how did you guys arrive at the decision then to attack roughly a $10 million deficit? I mean, I guess that's what I'm looking for.
There's a couple of things in the history. We had passed a referendum in 1995,
Right.
and prior to that, everything was cut. I mean, I can remember meetings where they talked about eliminating one elective. We had a packed house at Tinley Park High School. People, parents screaming about, my kid needs to take band, my kid needs to take fine arts, you don't understand. Well, we understood, but we couldn't afford it. Then and when the referendum passed, suddenly we were rich, for lack of a better word. And that kind of became the mindset. All those things that have been put on hold for years and years and years, suddenly, oh yeah, we can do that. Yeah, we can buy that. Let's do it. Then the superintendent prior to Dr. Kendall, his mindset was spend. Anything anybody wants, let's get it. And that's how we got to early warning. And that was under John Blanky as the finance chair. And that was pretty much the board's acceptance of the superintendent's direction to spend. And I was part of the board minority at that time, and I did not agree, and it didn't matter.
Kind of to go back to the history also of the previous direction from the board, and thank you for explaining the difference that you're, being advised to manage versus reduce. That does make a huge difference in the steps you're taking going forward. So this direction of managing deficit, is that something that was documented and put in some sort of approval that, or is it just
It was
a
not,
conversation?
it was not a board vote. It was pretty clear from the board that that's what they expected of me when I was hired. So there was discussions and people, and you gotta remember, at that time, the board changed again. And the people that were elected at that time realized where we were. And a lot of that was due to Tom's educating the board that this is a problem and will be a problem.
Right.
So while it was never a resolution, it was don't cut programs, do the best you can, keep it out of the classroom, and achieve as best you can academically. So this is the result of a lot of conversations, I knew where the board stood.
Okay. And I just asked just to clarify, because I don't know if this misconception that you were told to do something and you didn't do it, so that's where I was just wondering, where did that direction come from? How was it communicated? Was it documented? Was it voted? Just to understand it better. And if it was a conversation.
I think it was a conversation, and I think it was reflected in my evaluation and in the goals that we set as a board and an administrative team.
We've also addressed that in prior committee of the whole meetings where we discussed options for the district moving forward, and the option that was settled upon was to manage the deficit also with extending out our borrowing. And we could continue to do that as long as we maintain that manageable deficit.
I think it's fair to say it was reflected in a continuing votes, if you will, by the board over many topics. We had discussion about raising the amount of money that, what the parents pay when the kids register, and should we increase it by a certain percentage? Should we add an athletic fee on top of it, which was hundreds of dollars? And the direction from the board was if we can not do that and still maintain what we're doing, then we don't want to do it. So that's where I think it's more of, it wasn't that we passed a resolution and said we mandate that you do that. As Bill said, it was reflected in his evaluation. It was reflected in continuous votes that we took over on a number of issues. And just that was, just one of them. So.
Well, and the bond issues went through a series of board approvals with resolutions, and everybody that voted on them during those last three bond issues was full aware of the situation and the direction that we were maintaining.
We also changed the people we dealt with for the bond, which lowered our costs, lowered our interest rates, that made it more palatable.
Absolutely.
I think the other thing that we always talked about was taxpayers react when their bill goes up and down and up and down. That's what gets them excited. If it goes down one year and skyrockets the next, they're going to be all over you. If you can keep it flat, that kind of became the direction. And that's, when they scheduled the bonds so that the tax rate didn't change, that was important. That kept everything on an even keel, and that's pretty much what the board at that time was looking for.
Endowments, do we receive any? Do we have people that graduate from the school and come back and give anything back?
To the district, we do not. We have one gentleman that's a graduate of Bremen High School that provides an annual endowment to the foundation, but does not go to the district. That's separately managed.
And I think each of the buildings have alumni associations or some organization, and that goes directly to scholarships for the most part to benefit our students. It's not an endowment to build a wing or anything along those lines or deal with the deficit.
Okay. Obviously, foreclosure must play a role in our revenue for taxes, right?
Correct.
Isn't that one of the major causes on why we're running a deficit?
Foreclosures are major causes to our
Yes, I can go around my neighborhood and there's at least 30 houses that are vacant. If they're not nobody's paying taxes on them.
Well, somebody's paying taxes, even if the bank takes over, the bank ends up paying taxes, and if somebody were to then try to purchase those, they'd have to pay those taxes that have been in arrears. But that has not, we have noticed a decrease in our collection rates this past year. Typically, we're in the 94, 95% range. That has dipped down a couple basis points, but I wouldn't say that that's the significant reason as to why we're running a deficit right now.
Tom, would it be fair to say that those foreclosures are reflected in our equalized assessed value? That's where you're going to see it.
Yes.
That number has dropped. I know from Midlothian, that number has dropped 40% in the last 5 years.
I think we're like 35% as a district over the last 5 years in the reduction of EAVs. And it sometimes takes a year or two to catch up when a home goes in foreclosure as well. So it's hard to quantify that because you may see things, that happened 2 years ago show up 2 years later.
And then the EAV is set, you levy on a year later and you collect it the year after that,
Correct.
which is just goofy, but that's good.
The abatement of Walmart,
Yes.
can we put a dollar amount on how much they didn't pay the district if they paid maybe 80% of their instead of 40?
Yeah, the abatement is at 50% right now, and I'd have to double check those numbers, what it's projected to be once that becomes whole in terms of no longer having that 50% abatement, but I can get it that number. But that's going to have a positive impact on the district once that takes place.
Well, what we were collecting on vacant property was
Yeah, I think it was
$50,000. I mean, it was-
$28,000 back when, I think it was $28,000 back when, prior to that property being developed.
So 50% of Y is a whole lot more than 100% of X. And that was the mindset at the time, for Walmart and for the Lowe's Theater over there. That was a vacant property, it was the largest piece of vacant property in Cook County. And that was the only way to get it developed, so.
And we're better off with that abatement versus a TIF, because that could have been the other option that could have been imposed upon us and we wouldn't have had any control over
Also
that.
had, you can't think of the term now, when they build a new subdivision and everybody pays a little bit, and we got that.
What is a TIF?
A TIF is a tax increment financed area, and that can be imposed by the village or the city that's looking to create that TIF. Basically what that does is it freezes the assessed values at their present level for the length of a TIF. And, pardon me?
For 23
23 years is the maximum, right. Then they look to extend that. I just had a meeting with the village manager at Oak Forest a week ago. They're looking to extend TIF number 6 because what has happened is with TIF 6, they issued bonds on the TIF, and the bonds were issued based on an equalized assessed value that was up here. Well, in the last 5 years, that value is down here. There's no longer the increment to make up the bond payment, so they're underwater in terms of that. So they need to extend that TIF, and they're going to restructure their bond debt for that, taking into account the new EAVs, so that they can be able to make their payments. But they take the increments, and instead of those increments coming back to the taxing bodies, they're retained in the TIF, and then they're used as incentives for developers to enhance properties or to incorporate infrastructure, sewers, water lines, utilities, and those kinds of things. So that now if I'm a Walmart looking to come in and it's in a TIF zone, well, the village will say, okay, we'll provide these things for you. You don't have to pay for those. We'll have the TIF pay for those. It's a very common practice that, particularly in Cook County, to try and attract businesses into blighted areas.
But you can't bury shopping center is a tip.
Correct.
And their 23 years wasn't up, and they were at us, was it 2 years ago, extended? Because they couldn't get any businesses to come. That tip wasn't extended.
And that's the first thing that a business will look at. Okay, you have a tip, but when does it expire? Because I'm not coming in here for 2 years and then the tip expires and now I'm back to square one. So it's a critical component, and it's a very difficult situation. As I talked to the village manager, I understand the situation that they're in financially. It doesn't help us if we extend that tip, but it's going to hurt us if we don't extend it, because that area and that property will never have a chance, and Oak Forest would have to end up raising taxes now to cover those bonds that are going to be underwater now because of the drop in the equalized assessed valuation.
And hasn't Oak Forest just tipped the whole west side of Cicero from 159 to 149?
Yes.
All those businesses are part of the TIF district. We don't get a vote on that.
No.
We don't get any say. The village makes the decision. We get a say on whether or not it's time to say you can extend it, and that's 23 years. That's not 10 where you're getting half. 23 years you're getting, if you were collecting $10,000 this year, 23 years from now, you're still collecting $10,000.
The other
That's
thing
negative.
that they
going
can
down.
do along those same lines, the other thing that a village or city can do is they can dissolve an existing TIF and then they can re-TIF and incorporate a new one. So now, instead, you're faced with, do we extend for 10 or do we allow them, like they told us, well, that's fine if you're not in agreement, because they need the taxing bodies to sign off on an extension. So we do have some leverage there. But they also can then turn around and say, okay, the school districts aren't going to extend, that's fine, we're going to dissolve this TIF, we're going to create a new one, and now it's going to be 23 years instead of the 10. So we don't have a lot of leverage in that. I will say the village or the city of Oak Forest has been very good in terms of working with us and listening to our suggestions to provide some increments back to the district if there is in fact some surplus when they analyze the numbers. So we've had a good partnership as far as that has gone, and we want to continue that, because again, it's not going to do us any good, and it's not going to do the residents of Oak Forest any good, and the taxpayers and our students if this thing goes south and goes underwater, because then they're going to be forced to do certain things that are going to be harmful to all parties involved.
And that has happened in Hazel Crest, in Country Club Hills.
Sure it has, absolutely.
Where they had surplus funds in the TIF and they distributed it to the taxing bodies. They didn't have to do that, but they have done it historically. But as Tom's saying, like in Oak Forest, same thing happened in the Lothian. They TIF'd the property at 147th and Cicero. Property values declined. They couldn't make the bond payment, they dissolved the TIF. So now they're talking about reissuing another one. But I mean, it's a recurring cycle, especially in this economy. It really impacts the taxing districts, and we have nothing.
Very little.
Nothing we can do about it.
One last question. Looking at this state report card, the administration versus students for Bremen District is like 107 to 1, and like Lincoln Way is like 287 to 1. Why was it such a large discrepancy?
Yeah, this is something that we discussed, well, I don't know how many years ago now, but it's a reporting mechanism. Remember when we said our deans used to be on a teacher contract and we took that away? Lincoln Way reports them as teachers, even though they're doing department chairperson activities, they're doing dean's activities. And they have a different structure in their dean's office where they do hourly. So they don't have one person dedicated all day. They'll teach 4 classes and do a dean's position for an hour. So in their reporting, it looks incredibly different than ours. But our board, I asked our board, we have some supervisors that teach some classes. Do you want us to count those administrators, or do you want us to count those as teachers? And the board said, you know what, report it almost to our disadvantage, or report what we believe to be the truth. There's a lot of games that are played in numbers, and our district doesn't play the games. It's, the numbers are the numbers.
That's all I have.
Actually, two quick questions. At what schools did we lose a principal or assistant principal, you said, and a dean that we didn't
Hillcrest.
replace? At both the both positions were
Both.
Hillcrest?
But they have an extra assistant principal and an extra dean over the other three schools. It's not that they're
They're one short.
shorter staffed than the other schools at this time. At one point, the board had put in an additional assistant principal, an additional dean.
The server virtualization project, that's where somebody serves the computers off site, from off
Yeah,
site.
instead of having all the servers racked and stacked, there's a virtual component, so it's, the server is housed in the cloud offsite.
Okay, when we got the Apple TV, we got the grant for the Apple TV. Did we get this? I was talking about the smart board as being a pyramid board, or is it just a smart board?
We had Eno boards, and now we've gone to a different, more interactive one. I'm not sure the
Right,
name of it.
It's like an board, but it's about half the cost. So it's in essence interactive whiteboard. You don't need that heavy duty magnetic easy board that requires a pen. You can use your finger on a whiteboard. It does the same thing for half the cost.
So it's an Eno board that's half the cost, and it does the same thing.
Yeah, although like Tom said,
I can't recall the vendor that,
yeah, the name of it escapes me, but it's like an email board.
And then you can use your finger versus. What do you have to be in the top level recognition for finances? Is it those components that they?
yeah, they're listed out in there if you take a look at it, but it's a 3.5 to a 4.0 rating per the state, and there's a number of components that get factored in. It's your revenues to expenditure ratios is a component. It's your months on hand of fund balances is a component. Those are the two big weighted components that are in there. But I believe I put the rest of it in there. If not, I can provide it for you. It's right on the ISB website if you go to it.
Okay, fund balances and it was the fund balances.
Yeah, it's your months hand available fund balances as well as your revenues to expenditure ratios. Those are the two big weighted components that go into generating that score.
And then, where does Masro Financial come from? They help to balance out?
Masro Financial is our third-party administrator for our health insurance benefits on one side, and then they are our third-party administrator for our property and casualty insurance on the other side. We've had them for our property and casualty for the last several years, and we moved to them for this year, July 1, on our health benefits side. It's proved to be a very positive situation. We're just completing open enrollment for all of our staff, and the assistance that we've gotten from them through not only the documentation, but every staff received a mailing with all the critical information. They had staff that was here on site to answer questions each day in all 4 of our buildings for our staff to take advantage of. They've put in more time in the last 6 months than I think our previous TPA had done in a number of years. So it's been a very positive change in terms of that. I certainly welcome the change, as well as Sue Smolinski in our office, who assists with managing all the benefits.
how are we gonna tackle, our lists?
That's good. One question per page, that's what we're gonna go through, so we'll go quick. And I think a lot of it we've already answered in these last two presentations. If we didn't, feel free to ask questions along the way. Mr. Canning had a list of questions regarding administrative. Those are the answers. How do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, some of these are not calculated out in terms of dollars. And one of the main factors is, like I mentioned, we're completing our open enrollment. That will be finalized in the next day or two. And then we can see who fits into what categories and then put numbers to all of these questions once we have those finalized. But it's hard to put a number to those things until we have those situations finalized. But I did the best I could to answer some of those with the information that we currently have.
So I'm going to go through the list of questions. One of the questions was regarding ROTC for the district. There is a cost factor with that. If it was something that the board wanted to do, we would have to look into what that would cost and what impact that would have. We have not done that as of right now.
You said
ROTC. Next question was with regard to a district fine arts center. We have not looked into really what that would be because we were operating under a board direction to manage a financial deficit. If the board chose that as a direction, we certainly could do that. One of the questions was regarding forecasting the spending habits. I think we spend a lot of our time doing that with our annual budget. We start the budgeting process in March, and that takes us all the way through September. A lot of it's conservative guessing. A lot of it's hashing things out with people at the buildings, people at the district. So I think the presentation that we presented explains how we forecast a little bit. What plans have been made for legislation that could affect our district? I think a huge one was the negotiation process. And I think Tom did a pretty good job explaining that we've conservatively positioned ourselves to absorb what the state, whatever curveballs the state gives us. A couple of questions with regard to the cost of lunch and exploring a new company and vendors. There's a long, complicated process, and I think we've talked a little bit about the free and reduced lunch, and I've talked to Sodexo. Before we go any further, they're going to do a focus group with our students and do a presentation of what's happening at the board level, so it's not something that we would say is completely off the table, but that's one of the first places I think when I talk to our kids and go, so what do we need to fix in the building? They want better food and they want it cheaper. So I've had those meetings with Sodexo. We'll let you kick the tires on what they have to offer at an upcoming board meeting. Question?
What's the current cost? Is it what is the current cost?
For a student lunch? Somewhere in, depending on what you get.
It's like a 275 range for the a la carte
But
meal.
isn't that that's like a national average?
Well, I think they're going to have all that information and present that to you. I don't want to speak out of turn. To me, it doesn't seem high, but to a kid who gets a $5 allowance or whatever they get, it seems high. So we'll give you more information with Sodexo. Review the cost of providing transportation for students who want to take a class at another district school. Over time, we've built up our AP programs in all of our schools, so we had a lot more buses, so we've reduced that. I think we're running about 2 routes, and the cost is about $51,000 a year, but it provides, because we're a medium-sized district, we couldn't run all the programs at all of 4 of our schools, so we give the opportunity in the bus to get them there.
So if a student is in Tinley, wants to take their class at Hillcrest, there is transportation. They don't need to have their own vehicle?
For the morning courses, any course that a student takes at the end of the day, they have to provide their own transportation.
Because we would double the amount of routes, so it's one of those management pieces. But we do put most of our district courses in the morning, so that's not a case.
And that's a change, because when my kids went to school here, if you couldn't get yourself to the other school, you didn't take the class. And that was a decision the family made.
Yeah, I think that we've been providing transportation before I got here, so I don't know how long
It's been at least 13 years. It was in place before I started at the
I know there's been questions about the band budget. We've provided more money for the band within the confines of maintaining a budget deficit. We have, and again, it depends on what building and who you ask, band uniforms are something of interest and possibly an issue. In order for us to remediate that issue, we estimate, if we did it all at once district-wide, it would be close to $300,000, so we would put that in a capital improvement budget. We're looking at exploring parts of the uniform. If the parts of the uniform are universal for all 4 schools, it makes it a lot easier. The more customized the uniforms become, the more difficult it is to replicate them, so you have to buy a whole new set. So we're looking at, over the course of how many years of replacing our band uniforms?
moving forward.
If the board's direction is to maintain, probably
Be over 3 to 5
years, where every band would get a new set of uniforms. If the board wants to put us in a different direction, we would put that in a capital improvement.
How often do they wear the uniforms?
For parades, for games, home games. If they go to a competition, and I think each building is a little bit different, and they're older uniforms. They're not.
Yeah, I got a question.
They're not.
Excuse me, Debbie. Go ahead.
No, go ahead,
Why do you think that it took this long to even be an issue as far as to get new uniforms? I mean, I'm hearing, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm hearing that these things are 15, 17 years old, and even older. Why do you think, I mean, did it have the band directors come forward and say, hey, listen, you know, our uniforms just aren't up to snuff? Or can you elaborate on that and why you think that it's taking this long?
I think there's 2 reasons. I think the first reason is when we budget for band, we budget as an academic class. So when you budget as an academic class, the fine arts supervisor makes a presentation to Corey on that budget. And I don't think over time we acknowledge the extracurricular portion. So if you're looking at the administrative or the academic portion, you buy the things that are academic.
So academic, you mean like music, curriculum?
Curriculum, a lot of stuff was.
So, but uniforms just didn't meet that criteria.
A lot of the stuff was
Your band uniform.
for the class. So it was, there needs to be some acknowledgement that it is an extracurricular as well as a classroom. So that's what we're trying to do. But you can't undo 17 years of, I don't know if you want to call it neglect or whatever.
So basically, Bill, in a nutshell, it was just always looked at as academic versus anything, no outside as far as that, you know, an athletic type situation.
Right.
The other piece of that, though, band uniforms are completely different than other types of uniforms. in the sense that their lifespan is much greater than other types of uniforms. They're wearing these uniforms 8 to maybe 12 times a year. After each time they wear them, they're being cleaned, they're being cased, they're being put back and protected, much different. So when you look at getting new uniforms, and Mr. Anderson has looked at some vendors, depending on the type of uniform that you purchase, the lifespan of a new uniform is 15 to 20 years. So when you talk about they're 15 or 17 years old, that's not an uncommon thing with band uniforms. And if you compare that to other districts, you're going to see some similarities there. And I'm not saying we can't look at getting new uniforms, but that is
I
a big
think,
part.
you know, if who knows? Hindsight's 20/20, but you know, if you take a look at the uniform, this one may not need to be replaced, but this one's get worn, so you go ahead, so it doesn't hit you.
Well, you can't do that because they don't even make those anymore.
So they become outdated. Is that what you're
Well,
saying?
they become customized, so we couldn't go in and
Stay
say,
with the same line.
Bremen, we need 5 Bremen uniforms, you have to buy whatever the Bremen.
Okay, because I
is.
know, like in football, you're able to do that.
Right, because you're buying,
shoulder pads or
it's a
or
stock,
uniform,
right. So we're looking at maybe 3/4 of the uniform being stock, the pants, if we can come to a combined piece, then we can replace those, the coats, the fancy stuff that's school colors, that's gonna be a commitment, so.
Let me ask you this, just because obviously there's a lot of band parents here
Sure.
on the board. And I certainly wouldn't want it to get out in the community. It's on tape that, the band parents are going to get their way. I guess what I would look for from you or from the administration is to admit, and again, I don't want to throw anybody under the bus, but say, hey, we've neglected that area. And the parents and the current board members, we have a right to address that, right?
I think it's an inaccurate statement though, because when we, 2 years ago, whatever, increased the band budget, we asked the department supervisor, what do you need? Not one time has he ever said he needs uniforms.
The department
Ever.
supervisor, the current one?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
we can address a need if it's
Brought to the attention.
said it's a need.
And
I think the other side of that is it has a lifespan of 20 years, why are we replacing it?
I think a lot of them are at their lifespan.
They're at the end of
They're
their life.
knocking on the
Their
door if
lives.
they're not there,
Yeah.
right? And some are in
Yeah,
more
a
shape
lot of
than
us do
others.
the fittings.
But the problem is they're a bulk. And the other piece I will say is, when you give a directive to your administrative team to be reasonable in your budgets, Keith was being reasonable in his budget. If he had a priority, his priority was getting instruments in the hands of the students that didn't have them. You're not going to build a program if the students
So he
don't
went
have
that way
instruments.
versus the uniform.
Right, because if you're going to prioritize, so when you say anybody was wrong or neglectful, it was a priority that you don't have a band without instruments, and some of our kids just can't afford the instruments. So if you're building, that's how he chose to build, and I respect him for that, and it's not a piece.
Well, we have competitions in band, obviously, everybody knows. We just took state last year, and now we're in the Thanksgiving parade downtown. We want to represent our district
Absolutely.
nice and our kids nice. And, I just want to make sure that it doesn't get out there that, oh boy, the board members at band kids are the ones that are, we've neglected that area.
Well, I would disagree.
At state, did they wear the uniforms?
Well, you would disagree?
I would disagree
We
that,
neglected it because one of our administrators maybe didn't.
That's not
My daughter was a band, and she wore her uniform for a whole 4 years, maybe 3 times.
They wore tuxedo.
They wore
tuxedo
tuxedo.
shirt.
Are the pants the same that we wear, that they wear for
Of the marching
the
band.
marching band?
Overalls.
So I don't know that they wear them 12 times a year. I can remember 4 times my daughter wore hers
Well,
the whole time.
and
Well, if
here's-
neglect isn't the right word, you're saying that, you know what, they're at the end of their life. I mean,
and we're putting a plan in place to fix that. And what was the cost of a uniform was,
Well, there's a wide range too, depending on the uniform. You're looking at $150 upwards to $350, depending on
How
the
fancy.
type of uniform and the vendor that you go with. So
I
that's
think
per
another-
uniform.
Another
That is
problem with this
that's another proof.
is the academic extracurricular. If we look at the rest of the extracurriculars, the district is not paying 100% for football uniforms. The district is not paying 100% for softball uniforms. That group raises funds and purchases them themselves. Band doesn't do that. There's, like we said, priorities. Maybe their priority is to go on the cruises, to go to New York for Thanksgiving. That's their priority.
We're not going to New York.
Well, I'm just saying, I'm just one for example,
The
their
band
trips.
pays a registration fee every year to fund their program.
Pays a registration fee for what?
For whatever the band needs, for music, for maybe transportation, I mean,
How do you pay that?
we write a check.
To the school or to the band boosters?
To the band boosters.
See,
But that's eliminating a burden.
So
on
do the sports
district.
kids? No, it's not, because it pays for stuff the district's not responsible for anyway.
But. I
But if
think-
the district's going to
I
have,
disagree,
commit to
transportation
a
is-
band program or even larger than that, a fine arts program, we have to take some responsibility in making sure, and I'm not saying that we don't, okay? I'm not saying that we don't, but we got to make sure that we look at all the areas
Then we,
and support them kind of equally.
all the areas, meaning what?
All the areas that make up fine arts.
All right, then if we're gonna buy band new uniforms, then we're also gonna buy every athletic team their uniforms too. Why should those parents have to buy those, but we're gonna tell band they
Well,
don't?
they don't, because I tell you what, I was in finance committee and we improved $8,000 worth of pants one year, and I think football's on rotation, correct? And each school.
But we're still not paying 100%. That organization pays for them.
Only if they want something extra, and that's what I think you explained to me.
It depends on the situation, yeah, but a lot of times.
Hold on, go ahead, Tom.
A lot of times, like for example, cheerleading uniforms, they will order uniforms. The athletic directors will break up the uniform budgets accordingly and put them on a rotational cycle. And if particular teams want uniforms outside of that cycle, then they're responsible for coming up with Booster Club dollars to offset monies above what the athletic director is going to allot to them for uniforms.
But they have a uniform budget to work with.
Well, they don't, not every sport gets a budget for uniforms annually. No, that's up to the individual athletic directors to set the rotational cycle. Okay, cross country's up because it's been X number of years since they've had uniforms, and then it'll rotate to another sport. So they cycle it through that way.
and what a lot of sports do is the booster club buys the fancy uniform. So we have a standard issue uniform, but if you want your name on your back or
They come up with
the odd colors, the cool
And
things.
I think that's perfectly fine.
Right, what happens in the band program is there's that one band uniform, and if you want the Cadillac band uniform, you're looking at $600 a uniform times, so we're trying to get them to bring it back a little bit and be reasonable in their approach.
Well, here's a problem to that. I mean, the football programs and any other programs have the ability to generate the booster funds and by concession stands. I mean, there's a pretty penny being made off of some of these concession stands, okay? Whereas the band programs, for what I've witnessed now, and I can only speak to Tinley Park because that's where my son plays, they do not have the opportunity to generate those kind of funds. They do not share in gate, they do not share in concessions. Actually, sometimes they're told that they can't be there after trying to sell certain items to generate funds. So if they're not being able to generate funds at these contests, which they perform, I don't know where they would get the outside funds to do an upgrade or even afford any of their uniforms,
Football doesn't get gate either. And as far as generating funds, I
don't even think they need gate because I've seen some of those numbers off of the concession stand, and I don't begrudge it. I mean, that's awesome. These parents work hard, the boosters work hard to get those funds. But if we have a faction of the band that participates in those contests and they're not being able to generate any funds from that, that's an issue. Because then they can't do what you're saying that the other teams are doing.
There's a different level of participation too. You can go and after halftime they all leave. But the whole fine arts department was offered an opportunity to do a whole fine arts festival. Our kids could sell their stuff, drama kids could put on skits, the band could play, opened us up, you know, the world, admission fees, and decided they didn't want to take it
You
on.
mentioned that in an open board meeting once, and I had a band director come and said, I don't know what she's talking about, we were never offered that. And again, I don't know if that's true, and I wasn't here for that, you know, so we might want to clarify that, I guess, moving forward, that's
I
something
hope it
that,
was a Toy Parks band director because I spoke to him specifically.
I don't want to throw
When
anybody
was
under
this
the
fine
bus.
arts festival that could have been had?
3 years ago, every year, whatever, I offered it 3 years ago.
I wanted to look at another possibility of a priority here. If one of the problems, even from the feeder schools to the high schools, and then you're in the high school, you have to look at our areas here. And if you want to build a band program, you have to create the interest, and the interest needs to be there. I'm a former band student, I love band, I want the band. Yeah, I would say, hey, yeah, let's go grab it if we can do it. But we have to have, what's the use of having a program if you don't have the members and the participants? And part of that is prioritizing is get them in there, get an instrument in their hand for them to play so that they can participate, and they can do all state, all west, all whatever, the different competitions, and they can get scholarships. You know, they can get scholarships to college and stuff like that. Would love to look good. We gotta look good, you know, on the field. And there's other ways to do it. I'm not saying don't get a uniform, but I'm saying the priority is to get the instrument in the hand academically so they can play, so they can learn the tunage, so they can learn the notes.